Here's what we're going to do first thing this morning. The first thing we're going to do is go over the rest of your homework packet. I believe you had a finance quiz and finance math. The solutions were attached to that though. And then you had the big test. I think Jose had some questions on that. So we're going to do that first, just for a little bit. We're going to overview a little tiny on what we spoke about on Monday, appraising. And then we're going to do a little bit of group out work. We're going to do some of the math problems, some of the sales comparison approach. I'd like you all to work on it a little bit together. I've been doing a lot of research, by the way, about how adults learn, the best way to teach adults. I really do try to do better every time I teach a class. Like I mentioned to you the other day, I look at your feedback, but I've been doing some research, and this probably is obvious to you, maybe not so much to me, but adults do better when they do the work themselves instead of the instructor just telling them everything. It's more, what do they call it? More active, more hands-on. Not necessarily the kinesthetic, but just doing the work will see if you have the knowledge. And so we're going to be doing some of that the rest of the way out and just see how we do. Keep reminding you that this all depends on if you've read the unit and have been studying, well then putting what you've read and what we've talked about in action will help you retain the information a little bit better. So that's my goal anyway. So that's what we're going to do a little bit today. And then we'll finish Unit 17 with the cost approach and the income approach and conclude the day by going over Unit 13, which is an investment unit. There is some new information in there, the terminology cash flow, the terminology leveraging, and there are a couple of different math formulas, maybe 2 math formulas. Now, if you looked ahead at Unit 13, the math is what we're talking about in Unit 17 when we're going to speak about the income approach to value. The same math is used in Unit 13, except for just a couple of little separate little things. But if you know how to do the income approach, the other 2 things that I'm going to talk to you about today will come easier to you. Any comments or questions? Okay, then let's get out the work from your unit, your class work. 11, we didn't give the quiz for, I didn't give the answers for the pre-license quiz, did I? For class 11?
Chris did.
I did or didn't?
The other gentleman did.
He did?
Chris, I believe.
He did.
How did he, oh, he did? Okay. Because I didn't give him the answer key.
You didn't have an answer key.
Yeah,
You
he
just-
just read through them.
Oh, he did?
Make sure they're right.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
Actually, but I didn't, so for, question 25.
Question 25. Let's see if we can get there. Okay.
So it says, in order, well, I'll see if I can read it, but in order for the veteran to obtain a VA mortgage loan, it's necessary for the veteran to have certificate of reasonable value, which is pretty much like the appraisal, right?
Mhm.
And then the certificate of eligibility. I think he said the answer was only B, was answer B, is what he said?
It's both. The
Yeah,
answer is
that's-
both.
Yeah.
For a VA loan, the veteran, in order to get the VA loan, a certificate of reasonable value would have to be available. Now, literally, the veteran doesn't bring it, but in your reading, it said 2 certificates, didn't it?
Yeah.
The certificate of reasonable value is, like Renee said, an appraisal letter, and then the certificate of eligibility is used in order for the lender to figure out how much guarantee this veteran is entitled to. So the answer is both.
Okay.
Number 22?
22. Oh, 22, we're missing letter D, dog.
Okay.
Letter D, dog will be neither. So on number 22, everybody, that's my fault. FHA mortgage insurance insures a borrower against, and we know, you all knew it wasn't either one of those, but I'm sure that when you're looking at a question, you're thinking, well, but those are my choices, but we're missing letter D, so write in D, neither. And FHA mortgage insurance is for what though?
Say it again?
Number 22, what's FHA mortgage insurance for? It's for the lender, isn't it? It's for the lender in case of what? Default by the buyer, and in case of what? In case of default? Is it just for default? And foreclose and
Take back the property?
how about deficiency? Guys, it's about deficiency. If the borrower goes into default and the lender forecloses, they could get all their money, couldn't they? I mean, they could. The mortgage insurance is in case of default and deficiency. The lender is going to be protected. Everybody good? That's a pretty color on you. I think pretty good. All right, any other questions on this one? Okay. I didn't know Chris went over that with you. Okay, but that's good. All right, let's go. Finance, let me see here. Was it finance math next?
Yeah.
All righty. Now, you all had the solutions, but I do understand sometimes you still have a question. So let's talk about the finance math. Any particular question on this?
I think on 2, the answer key said D, but it was actually D. Is that correct?
How much interest do you owe the first year? Yes, the answer is D, dog. Everybody make that correction, and I humbly apologize. I probably typed this up, and go to number 2, everybody. How much interest do you owe for the first year? The answer is D. First year. Because first year is going to be a whole bunch, isn't it? So if you what was the interest rate?
7%.
7%. Thank you, Kim. You multiply that out and you get 17,500. Guys, hey, I'm gonna say this. How do you know I don't do that on purpose just to see if you're paying attention?
That's what you do.
Maybe.
That's what we're gonna go with.
That's where we're going with. So thank you for that. All right, anybody else? All right, so let me looky here a minute and see if I can find some that I think you really need to make sure you understand. Is everybody good on number 3, what the factor means? When it says for a 25-year loan at 6%, the factor is 6.85. Is everybody good on that? What does that mean? The factor is 6.85. What, Amber? The chart in unit 15, and the chart is to calculate what?
Amortization.
It's an amortization chart, and that number calculates what?
Interest.
And principal.
And principal. Amortization is correct, and in order to amortize, we have our principal and interest payment, don't we? So when you see factor mortgage factor, loan factor, or even interest rate factor, everyone think what Kim said, think about amortization. And in order to amortize, you do have to have principal and interest payment. Okay? Let me look here real quick. What about number 8? These discount points, a lending institution makes an FHA loan at 7%, loan at 7% interest. It increases their yield to 7.25% by charging how many points? So first of all, what does yield mean? Increase. And so what does it mean to the lender? What's another way to say it? Profit. The lender wants 7.25%, don't they? They agreed to make an interest rate of 7%, but they're charging discount points to this borrower to discount the note rate for their house payment. So does everybody understand when we speak about yield, we're speaking about the 1/8% per point. So if the lender wants 7.25%, and the borrower wants 7%, the lender needs to make up the 1/4, don't they? And how many points will that be? Let me show you a math trick. Put that in your calculator. 0.25, and then multiply it by 8. What did he give you? 2. Now, probably and maybe in your mind you say, well, I know 1/4 is 2/8. Guys, that's a little bit more thinking than I want to do. That's just a nice little math trick. And the reason you multiply by 8 is the common denominator, isn't it? Didn't your text say that rule of thumb, 1 point represents 1/8% increase to the lender? So 8/8, kind of washes it out. 8/8 is 1/2%. So that's just a little math trick. 8 as a common denominator, that'll just tell you right then how many points you need. Put 0.75 in your calculator and multiply by 8. So you see what I'm saying? It'll save you some time in case you get just a question like that, because really and truly that shouldn't be a time-consuming question. Is everybody with me? Shouldn't be too much,
1/8 equals 1 point, right?
1/8 equals 1 point. Let's say it a different way.
Okay,
1/8%
a percent.
equals 1 point charge to the buyer.
Okay.
To lower the interest rate by 1/8, the lender's going to charge 1 point. So 1/8 does equal 1 point.
Okay.
Okay? The cost of 1 point, though, is what? 1%. So 1/8 is the interest rate manipulation. Lower the rate by 1/8, and when you do lower the rate by 1/8, the cost of it is 1%. So the lender gets that money, which is profit, which raises the rate of yield back up. So they get paid for the discount, which means it's almost as if they didn't discount it, because they still get their money one way or the other. The borrower is having a lower note rate to calculate their house payment on. They're still paying the interest. Does everybody sort of understand that? It's a little bit of an oxymoron, discount rate. All righty, let me look real quick and see if there's anything else here. Like number 11, they're also giving you that change in interest rate. Now, they didn't ask you what the yield was per se. They're asking you what the cost is. So, as Amber was mentioning, if it says that the lender wants 8 1/8, you do have to realize exactly what she said. 1/8 is 1 point, right? Is everybody following me? The borrower wants 8%. The lender wants 8 1/8. And so you have to realize, well, there's 1/8% different, so that means that's 1 discount point.
So how would you work that one?
Tell me what you think. If the lender needs 1/8% more, the question is, what is the cost of the 1/8? So what is the cost of 1 point? 1% of the loan.
Okay.
1% of the loan, and was the loan amount 45,000? I understand what you're really asking about. I think when we think about the 1/8, that just kind of upsets the apple cart a little bit. Because we're thinking, oh gosh, we gotta figure out the 1/8, and it's kind of just messing you up. If they ever ask about what the charge or cost is of a point, it's always 1% of the loan for every point. The 1/8 is just the interest rate. And so we're not gonna do anything with the 1/8 as far as calculating.
Okay.
Does that make sense then? All righty. On number 14, did anybody have any issues with that? If a lender agrees to make an 80% loan on a house that sells for $290 and the property appraises for $280, what's the amount of the loan? 80% of what? What? 280. Everybody good? Well, Portia, you said the appraised value, and I didn't look real quick. The appraised value happens to be the lower amount, right? So be careful though, it's not always the appraised value, is it? It's whichever one's lesser. And in this question, it happens to be the appraised value. You do have a qualifying the buyer math problem. What about number 15? So somebody tell me how to do number 15 without looking at the solutions.
Take the monthly income
Take the monthly income,
times 28%,
times 28%. Renee, why times 28%?
because it didn't give any recurring debt.
Excellent. They didn't give recurring debt. That's a big clue. 3,300, I'm sorry. If they don't give debt, you know that you're gonna fall back to the 28%. And so 3,300 times 28%. 924? Okay. Oh, number 16, so it's about the same thing, isn't it? Except you would divide the annual income by 12. And the 29.41% were FHA loan qualifying percentages. Since the book was just recently rewritten or revised or updated, the percentages for FHA qualifying have changed some, so they're a little bit higher than that. It's 43. Does anybody remember what those qualifiers are on FHA? I think it's 30, might be 33,41. Let me look real quick and see if I can tell you. Because I want to ask you a question about that actually. So in the loan section under FHA, it may not tell you in your textbook, but it's 31.43% now for FHA. So what do you think about that? The FHA loan qualifying percentages used to be 29.41. 29% of your monthly gross income is allowed for housing. 41% of your monthly gross income is allowed for all debt. Now, it's 31% of your gross monthly income for housing, 43% of your gross monthly income for debt. Now, everybody, we went through a financial crisis, and had a whole lot of foreclosures throughout the whole United States, and now those ratios are higher. Tell me what you think. If the ratios are higher, what does that mean?
The loan amount, because it's 100% financing.
No, it's not 100% financing. FHA, Laura said, it would have something to do with the loan amount, because in an indirect rate, what she's saying is they can afford more because the qualifying numbers are giving them more of their income can go for a house payment. So, more of their income. That's a very, yeah, could go,
Higher percentage.
yeah, say it.
The
Higher
debt's
percentage,
higher.
so instead of
Yeah,
20,
everybody's
36.
debt's higher, so I think that moves
But
the
the market
numbers.
has changed.
Yeah, it moves the numbers, but FHA does require a down payment of at least 3%. VA does allow the 100% loans. But, in other words, they're gonna allow them to have more debt, on this, and for some reason that troubles me a little. I mean, it just seems a little strange. We went through the financial crisis. FHA loans typically, well, they're low down payment. So if you're not putting much down, and I'm just generalizing, you're not putting much down, you don't have as much risk as the lender does. But they're allowing you to have more debt now. Why do you think that is?
Because they want more people in houses.
They want more people to own houses. That's a point. And what else?
But the market has changed, so things cost more too, so.
You know what, that's true too. The market has changed, things cost more. So it's interesting, both of those are very good points, because the older percentages were around forever and ever, and things have changed. I like both of your points there. All righty, let's see what else we got here.
Is that,
Yeah, huh?
yeah, is that are those numbers from the FHA loans, or is that from the lender?
FHA.
That's getting, okay.
FHA. Amber's question was, are those ratios specifically to a lender, or are they FHA specifics, and they're FHA specifics?
I just didn't know, maybe if the lender allowed those higher numbers because they have the insured, the insured.
Oh, there's a good point. Amber said, well, there's mortgage insurance on it anyway. Excellent point. But it is an FHA guideline. But excellent point you're bringing up. Since there's mortgage insurance, if there's default and deficiency,
Right, they have that.
they got that cushion. Okay, then. I don't see anything else that I want to point out to you. So let's go to the next part of our homework packet.
Since we're on the subject, can you explain to me, because I'm confused, when looking for a percentage, you were saying that you're supposed to multiply and divide in some cases?
If you're looking for percent, you're going to divide. If you're doing the T-bar, because the percent is right here, and so you would divide. So what percent are you asking about?
No, I was just confused on when to do that.
Okay, so if you're looking for a percent, for example, let's put up a fraction. If you get an area problem and it says 3/16 of this land cannot be used because there's a creek running on that part of the land, what percent of the land can't be used? Well, if we're converting a fraction to a decimal and then a percent, you divide, and that would be like the T-bar. The numerator goes in the calculator first, so 3 would be divided by 16. And that would give you the decimal. And if you want to make it a percent, you multiply by 100, which means moving it right 2 places. And then you'd add the percent key. Right? So when you're looking, if you're thinking about the T-bar and you're looking for a percentage, Think about, this is sort of like setting up a fraction. The little number always goes in first, divided by the big number.
I guess my calculator, I need to find a different one, because it just gives me a 19 when I do that on my calculator.
Oh, it already rounded up.
Is that what it is?
I would, I think I would, we don't want you to round up automatically like that.
Right.
You need to have the decimals at least 3 places to the right.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know how to do that.
I'll talk to you about the calculator
Okay,
later.
and I don't know whose this is, but I'm claiming it now, it's mine. It's been here and I love it now.
Thanks.
Nice
It's
one.
a, I had a student come in yesterday to sign up for the class, and I told him, I said, you need to bring a calculator.
It should change it, they switched it to top, I think.
And you saw that one?
No, I didn't, no, I'm not showing nobody. And he looked at me and said, a calculator? And I said, yeah, but you can go to the dollar store. I guess he's thinking it had to be some financial real estate. And I said, go to the dollar store. That would might have come from the dollar store. All righty, let's go to class 13 now. And you had your big take-home test. And so let's look at this and see if you have any questions about any of these. Now, I gave you the solutions, the answers to those, didn't I? And then I gave you the math solutions, but you still may have questions. Okay, so I'm going to leave it up to you. Everyone, this is a pretty good quiz right here, and I'm going to send you home with another one for this week's work. And it's a really good, well, we'll have to call it more than a quiz because there are a lot of questions on it. But at this stage of the course, we need to be getting ready for cumulative kinds of questions and get ready for the test. So the packet I'm going to give you today, I'm going to give it to you in a minute because I want to tell you about a few things. There's not much work in here. There's a lot of information in here, though, to help you study. So not as much work as that looks like. All righty, so
60.
number 60. For listing purposes and entry into MLS, the heated living area of a one-story home can be accurately based on. And what is your question, Amber? What did you think it was, or what's your question?
I don't know, I guess I didn't, I don't know exactly what my question was.
Okay,
Maybe by the answer.
the answer should be neither, because,
It's about air
You're
conditioning.
going by,
okay. When we measure exterior. Did we talk about this when we talked about condos, that we measure inside because you get title to unit airspace? And I said if you measure a house or a townhouse, you measure exterior. So you measure the exterior walls. So if it's a one story, shouldn't be difficult. You would take the property outside and sketch it. You know, we've been doing area problems. It's kind of a way to do square footage, isn't it? So if I said a lot is 100 by 50, or 50 by 100, that wouldn't necessarily be a house, but it could be a house. So you just measure outside and multiply it and calculate it that way. So a one story could be a rectangle or a square, or it could have some offsets, but you would measure what you can and draw it out and then multiply it.
okay.
The,
So that's
for-
what, I just didn't know about the I forgot about that.
Okay, I'm going to show you where you can see it too. When it talks about heated living area includes the 6 inches for the walls. So it includes the entire structure. Now we do put, and it might have thrown you on the MLS. MLS, we do put in room sizes, But everybody, that's not for square footage, that's for the room size. If an interested buyer says, how big is that dining room or living room, we've got the room size there. Because on MLS, we don't measure bathrooms, we don't measure hallways, we don't measure closets for MLS, and every one of those things would be included in the heated living area. So when we're looking for heated living area, I'll show you where this is, but let's write it down one more time. You measure exterior walls because the 6 inches in the exterior wall does count. Guys, the interior wouldn't hold up if you didn't have the exterior, would it? I mean, that's kind of a silly statement, but you gotta have the structure. The other thing is there are 3 criteria for heated living area. One would be, it would have to be permanently heated. It would have to have heat that is of a permanent nature, not, plug-in kerosene, or it has to be permanent. The other criteria is it would have to be completely finished. So whatever area you want to include in your square footage would have to be heated and finished. And then the area would have to be directly accessible to another main area. So for example, if you had a ranch with a basement, but the only way to get to the basement was to go outside and go into the basement, you cannot count that in the total heated living area, because it's really not living area if it's not directly accessible. Now, it would have value, does that make sense? There would be value to that basement, but so you would measure it, of course, and put into the MLS that this is other area, and have the measurements, and just write not directly accessible from the interior. Yes, ma'am?
So what if it was accessible, like just a door where you can go down to?
If it's completely finished, it counts. So LaToya said, well, what if the basement had a door inside, like a lot of basements do, and you walk right straight down? If it is heated permanently and finished, and it meets that direct accessibility, it can count as living area. So let me show you where this is in your textbook. Hold your place. We hadn't even gotten a place yet. So used to saying that. Go to page 690. 690. And this is your appendix, is it appendix C? That talks about your square footage. And this is only a handful of pages to read, everyone, but I would probably go ahead and read that. Not right this minute, of course, but if you haven't read it, I would go ahead and get that out of the way. But in your right-hand column on page 690, it tells you the 3 criteria. And now, here's something, let's talk about this. Does the Real Estate Commission make us measure houses? No. Does the Real Estate Commission make us put square footage in MLS? I'm not sure if MLS does, but I think it probably is a required field for MLS. What that means is the real estate industry has always advertised square footage. As long as I can remember, I started in the business in the 70s. Guys, we've always advertised square footage. That's what the consumer's gotten accustomed to. What am I paying per square foot, for this property? So in a way, I'm gonna say in my own words, we sort of created this little problem for ourselves, because agents do make mistakes on measuring houses because we're not experts in it. I mean, you could even look at 2 appraisals and there could be a difference in the number. Shouldn't be way off, but there could be a difference. But it's one of those things that the commission says, since you do it, you need to do it correctly. Since you do it, here are some guidelines on how to do it. And the Real Estate Commission would expect to see a sketch in your listing file of how you arrived at those numbers. And getting back to that question, looking at the tax card where you can go online and pull the tax card from the tax department would not be acceptable for getting square footage. I mean, it'll say on the tax card how many square feet, but guys, that's oftentimes incorrect. And if you use that number, you'll be accountable. Using someone else's number. How about this? You get a listing that was listed with someone else and it expired, but then you get it and you look at the MLS sheet and say, oh, well, I'm going to use those numbers. Why do I want to go out and remeasure and do all that? It was just on the market. Wrong. You are responsible. If you're putting it into MLS, you're responsible for the numbers. So the commission does hold us accountable if we advertise square footage, and MLS would be advertising. Now, everyone, they're not going to hold you to absolute perfection. If you go back and read this, it does say they understand that we're not perfect because no one is, but they understand that, so they do give a little fudging room of about 5%. So you really shouldn't go out there and just wing it. You need to tape it off and measure. Now, that's one of the things that when you affiliate with your real estate firm, your broker in charge should teach you how to do that, train you how to do that. Shadow maybe brokers in the office when they go out to look at property and see how they measure. Because not all houses are just straight 2 stories and not all houses are just 1 stories. So, you know, it could be a little challenging to measure depending on what the property looks like. Okay, does that help? All right, questions? Does a for sale by owner have to give out the residential property disclosure statement?
Yes,
Yes. Why?
so they can back out.
So they can back out. Who can back out?
Customer, if they buy.
I'm gonna give you this so you can back out.
No, so they don't back out of the sale.
Oh, so they don't back out.
So they can't.
So what Jose's saying is, you give this residential property disclosure statement to the buyer when?
When they come and look at the place.
Well, a lot of brokers do it then, but when do we have to give it to them?
3 days.
Your first meeting
No,
versus sending contract.
no. Y'all got a, what was the question? Y'all got a lot in that brain right now. I'm talking about the residential property disclosure and homeowners association disclosure statement that sellers of most residential property have to give. The real estate agents do it. Guys,
And make
here's
the
the
offer.
reason. Before the buyer makes the offer, they should receive this residential property disclosure statement. What?
I was just clapping that he got it right.
Oh, that he got it
Just
right.
we were all struggling as well.
So many wrong answers. There's a right one. And Jose is right. If the buyer does not get it before they make an offer, they will have 3 days. That's the 3 days where they can walk away from the contract. And so my question to you was, do for sale by owners have to do it? And yes, it's not a commission rule, everybody. It's North Carolina state mandate that has to be done. Because remember, we're a caveat emptor state, let the buyer beware. Well, this is kind of a way for the buyer to have a kind of a look, what is the condition of the property, if the seller answered the questions, right? If they answer the questions yes or no, because remember, they can choose no representation. All right, no more questions? All righty, then let's move on. Let's talk just a minute or two about our discussion on Unit 17 so far. So let's talk about what we, just a little tiny bit of a review of the beginnings of Unit 17. First thing we talked about was going into the appraising business. The appraiser would have to be licensed by the state, wouldn't they? Which makes sense to you. And they would have to take a course, pass the test. They would have to come back, take other courses, and even take continuing ed. And then they would affiliate under a lead or head appraiser. They would be called an apprentice. What is an appraisal? What's the definition of appraisal? What, Liba? Okay, nah, nah.
An opinion,
It's an opinion or an estimate of value. Now, guys, this is just a play on words. She was on the right track. Remember, we said they don't determine the value. And I know it's a semantic thing, but for a test question, make sure you remember that they don't go out and determine the value. But remember, we said the market does that, right? And it is an estimate or an opinion. And Liba, I do think it's semantics in a way, because you could overthink it and say, well, what's the difference? But I would just remember that. So it's an estimate or an opinion of value. What else goes with that definition?
Verification.
They're verifying what the buyer and seller agreed to per contract. What else about an appraisal?
As of a specific date.
Laura said, as of a specific date, a specific property. Exactly correct. Excellent. Real estate brokers do something to help the seller price their property. And what do we call what we do? A CMA. And what does that mean? CMA stands for what? Comparative market analysis or assessment, Justin said. You're going through the marketplace and you're looking for what buyers have paid for property that looks like this, because it predicts what buyers will pay for your property. Make sense? So we're looking for properties. What kind of properties are we looking for on a CMA? Similar, my question's not worded well. Similar properties that have sold is what I'm trying to get at, and I didn't word that right. Similar properties that have sold. Sold means closed out. It means it's been completed and everything's over, so we know it's a done deal, right? It's closed. So we're looking for what has sold and closed out, because that shows what it really sold and closed for. And that's what appraisers do also. What did I tell you a CMA is a version of? What does a CMA look like in regard to an appraisal? The appraiser does the sales approach, the cost approach, the income approach. Our CMA is a version of the sales comparison approach. In other words, I even mentioned to you that worksheet in your Unit 17. I said, this looks like a CMA to me. And it was a worksheet that an appraiser prepared before he puts it on the appraisal report. So we need at least, I'm not on any page really, Sonia. We're just reviewing a tiny bit. So the appraiser's going to come up with probably a whole lot of properties, and the worksheet we saw were 5. And then they're going to narrow down to the best 3. Does the appraiser average those best 3 to come up with a number? No, they never average everybody. So in other words, when we did remember we did the problem on the board when we said A, B, and D had positive features, or C had negative. You know, we got 4 numbers down at the bottom. We didn't take them and average them and add them and divide by 4, did we? The appraiser's going to look and say, which one of these best suits is the best one that looks most like our subject? The one with the fewest adjustments, the one that best suits. Now, in your reading, it did use this term several times. Did you remember reading and seeing the term weighted average? Weighted average is it's not the straight arithmetic average, but it's more like, if you can, as a visual, it's more like the appraiser is looking and saying, where am I going to make my decision? I'm going to weigh in more on this house to make my decision. This house carries more weight as far as coming up with the value. Does that make sense? It's kind of in reconciliation also. Remember, we said that's the drawing the conclusion. If the appraiser did the sales, the cost, and the income approach. At the end, he's gonna weigh and figure out which one am I leaning more on to draw my conclusion. Remind me, if he leaned on the sales comparison approach, what kind of property did he appraise? If his decision is based on the sales comparison approach, single-family residential or
Vacant land.
vacant land. If the appraiser looked at an old historic property or a school or a church, which approach would he lean on more to come up with the answer? Cost approach. And if he was looking at income producing, we're going to talk about a lot today, income investment property. All right. I wanted to mention something because I don't know if this is confusing to you, but I thought about it and I wanted to bring it up. Remember, we were talking about BPOs, and I mentioned to you that a provisional broker may not be paid to do a BPO. Remember that? And we also mentioned that a BPO and a CMA, according to the Real Estate Commission, can be used interchangeably, those terms. When you get your license and you get it activated with a BIC, you will be on provisional broker status, correct? Everyone, you're a broker though, aren't you? Your license is a broker's license. So once your BIC activates your license for you, you can go out and start acting like a broker, meaning you're going to go out and look for listings. You're going to go out and look for buyers, do open houses, do phone duty. If you go out and get a listing, you're going to sign it on behalf of your real estate company. You will get your commission if that property sells. Is everybody with me on that? And part of the listing process is to do a CMA. That's a client level expected duty. You will get paid your commission if your listing sells. Doing the CMA is not the same as doing a BPO for $100 and getting paid. In other words, your commission derived from getting a listing is not the fee that this is talking about. Does that make sense? So when it says you cannot be paid a fee to do a BPO, they mean for a non-client. In other words, like I said, if a bank calls you and says, will you do us a BPO, even if they called it CMA and there's a non-client and they say we'll pay you $100, you may not do that unless you are non-provisional. But if you go out and get a listing and you're going to do a CMA, we don't charge it necessarily for that. We're charging the entire commission that is for the marketing, which includes everything. So the commission is not the same thing as a fee to do the BPO. Does that make sense? Okay. I was reading over some things yesterday and I thought, I think we ought to make sure that we understand that. All right. Everybody pretty good? Okay then. Let's take our break and then we're going to come back and do a little bit of group out work.